Did the slides change as well? Or has the slides not changed?
Oh yeah, it's changed.
Okay, cool. All right, so a little bit about me. As Calista mentioned, Uni Melb and CISSA alumni, so really excited to be back and giving this workshop. I'm a group design lead at Canva, and my primary focus at Canva is everything to do with product growth, experiments, internationalization, and monetization. So if you're interested in those things, come chat to me afterwards. I can talk to you all day about those. Cool. So what we'll cover today is we'll briefly touch on ideation, why even use Figma, how to get started with Figma, prototyping and user testing, and then eventually developer handoffs. So when we're thinking about like problems, it's great to think about it through design thinking or a design lens. What we mean by that is the 5 stages of design thinking. So you have empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And as you can see, it's a constant evolving process. Where you guys are probably at right now during this hackathon is maybe the ideation stage and the prototyping stage maybe. So the prototyping stage meaning you're actually building the thing out. But I thought it'd be good to maybe just jump back a little bit onto the ideation stage just to make sure that what we are coming up with is going to help us make our lives easier when we do actually build the thing out as well. So I like to approach all my designs through user flows. What is a user flow? User flow is like what we want, like what goal do we want users to achieve by completing a particular flow. What I mean by that is an example could be how website visitors create an account, buy Dogecoin, or subscribe to a mailing list. They're clear, actionable goals, and it's up to us as designers and even just product teams to figure out how do we make that easy for users to do. So here's an simple example. So the user clicks on the sign up button, they enter the email address and password, and then they receive confirmation. I like to just start off simple and don't overthink it. Just kind of like, if you know like the most important parts, just lay them out. And eventually, if there's gaps and holes in it, you'll eventually pick those up as well. Most importantly, keep them one-directional. There shouldn't be any reason for you to be going back and forth between these user flows. And also, most importantly, split them out into distinct flows as well. So you can imagine the examples we had before, these 3, like they could be done in succession, one after another. But for a particular user flow, you wouldn't have those, all 3 of those connected. They're all distinct in their own right. And what I said before as starting simple, when you start simple, later on it helps you to identify gaps and edge cases. And it's perfect for QA testing as well. So I really find it useful at work to kind of have these user flows ready and to take them to the engineering teams and the QA teams and get them to have a look through it. And a lot of the times engineers and QA testers will come back and say, oh, have you considered this, this, and this? So yeah, it's a really good artifact to have for your team. Cool. Now we'll jump into a bit about the next stages of ideation, so like designing and prototyping. So there's, I see there's like 3 levels of fidelity of prototypes. There's what you have low fidelity, so just paper prototypes. So these are just sketches and stuff like that. You then have wireframes, so going up a level of fidelity, and you're starting to kind of put the pieces together to see how it looks and feels on a digital screen. And then eventually something a lot more high fidelity. So like a click-through prototype with like pixel perfect designs. Cool. Any questions so far? All right, all good. I'm gonna keep going. So why Figma? And most importantly, why prototype at all? Prototyping is really helpful because you'll never know 100% for sure whether or not a new product or feature, how it will be received by users until it's out there in the wild. But you can get a pretty good idea through prototyping and research. So it saves time and it saves money. So there's different levels of fidelity of tools. So you have your low fidelity, which is again like pen and paper wireframes. Then you have something like jumping upper level. You have Figma, Adobe XD, and Sketch, which are they'll create like nice static screens. But over time, these products have gotten quite good at also prototyping. You then have tools such as Principal, Prototype, and maybe even After Effects. So these introduce micro animations and stuff into your prototypes. Then you move on to Framer and actually just build the thing out as well. So these are super powerful, but they have quite a steep learning curve. Where the industry is at currently today is most designers will kind of be in this column here, where with Figma, Adobe XD, and Sketch. But once you start working in the industry, you'll find that designers of any level will kind of dabble and have a little bit of experience in all of these. Hopefully this video plays. So this is an example of something that's a lot more high fidelity that I've created in Figma. So Figma is quite cool because you can go from static screens straight to stuff with like animations and like kind of clicks and everything like that as well. So like I think for me or for most of my work, it does the job. But there'll be some times where a certain project will require me to kind of detail out the animation values a bit more closely. So that's when I might jump into After Effects and I work with engineers to figure out how that looks.
Yeah, sorry to cut you in, but there's a question in the chat. Livia asks what sort of research you can do in a short hackathon.
Yeah. Oh, someone's got to go on mute. In a hackathon, sorry, someone's got their mic on and it's giving feedback.
Oh, is it mine?
Sorry. I'll actually touch on research a little bit later as well, but in a short hackathon, what you can do is, it depends what type of research you're looking for or what answers you're looking for as well. If you're looking for whether or not your idea is viable, that's when you go back to like the defining stages of that design thinking process, and you might try and see if this is actually a real problem that needs to be solved. So through that, you might do quick surveys to see if your problem, or if your solution will actually solve a problem that you think actually exists. But if it's more research around if your product is working well enough, that's when you might create the prototype and do some light user testing to see if what you've created will kind of solve the problems that you've identified. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool, I'm going to move on. So now we'll get actually started with Figma. So Figma's free. Sign up for an account. They have a really great, this is something that Calista showed me the other day. Figma's got a really cool like hackathon starter pack, and they've also got best practices blog as well. So I would start there. It's free and it's collaborative. So because I know the hackathon is remote, so yeah, it's a great tool to be just sharing designs and ideas with your teammates. I would highly recommend using a design system for the hackathon. There's no reason to redesign buttons from scratch. Like Atlassian, Google, Apple, and GitHub all have really great design systems. And it's awesome because they'll have the Figma library. The developers on your team can just grab these design systems and have those buttons and all those ready to go as well. So feel free to maybe have Figma open, and we'll do a bit of a demo run through later and you guys could follow along. But the basics of Figma is honestly all you need to really get started is like, you know how to draw a rectangle, know how to draw maybe a circle, and insert text for designs. And maybe as well, just grouping items together for simplicity. So that's Control G. I'll go through these shortcuts again later as well, once we actually get Figma open. So another thing you might hear a lot, especially on Figma's website and in blog articles, is Figma components. So what are Figma components? They're reusable elements used across your designs. They help keep your design consistent. They allow for changes to be made quickly across all your designs and your product. And they're either the master component or the instance. I'll show these slides around later. There's a really cool, like short 3-minute video on what components are. But essentially, if you're designing like a really big feature or product, and you're using a consistent button throughout the whole way, but let's say in the last 2 minutes, you want to change the button color, for example, rather than having to go through and change the button color on all of the instances of the button, you could just change the master component, and then that change will get trickled throughout all your designs. Cool. So let's get Figma open, and I'll change the screen that I'm sharing, and we might walk through some of those things that I just briefly mentioned. Right, I'm sharing Figma now. Can you guys all see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So yeah, what I was mentioned before about you really only need rectangles, circles, and text. So in Figma, it's always good to start with a frame. So frame is kind of like a container for how your design will look and feel in the actual container. So you can insert a frame by either pressing F on your keyboard or pressing this button in the top left corner. Once you have your frame selected, on the right hand side, you've got a bunch of different presets. So if I was designing, let's say, an iOS application, I might just click on iPhone 11 Pro. And now this is the correct dimensions for an iPhone 11. If I was designing a desktop application, I'll go ahead and I'll add that in as well. So these are kind of constraints for you, which is cool. But now you go and start like popping out your design elements. So what does an iPhone have? As like a status bar. So I've just hit R for rectangle, and I'm adding in a rectangle for the status bar at the top. Might just make that black. I'll now add in a navigation bar, like so. There's also a tab bar at the very bottom. What else might we need? So this is like a profile page for someone, so maybe a circle in the middle. I'm now just wireframing the whole thing out. So what's next? Maybe their name. So I like to put these kind of placeholders here to begin with, just to kind of give me a rough idea of how the page will look like. Maybe there's like some information about the user. So I might just do dot points or something. The thing that was mentioned before about grouping is if you select multiple elements like this, you hit Command G on your keyboard, it'll group them together. So if I just rename this to dot point now, so this is now an instance I can move around together. But then I can also just duplicate these as well. So you can just go Command C, Command V, copy and paste, like so. And now I've made a group of these. So very quickly, you can kind of just like start wireframing out the look and feel of how your app will look like. And then once you kind of have all these screens laid out like so, and you're happy with how it feels and how it looks, that's when you might start going back and actually start bringing it to life with like color and replacing some of this with like actual text, for example. So.
There's a question in the chat asking you about your favorite Figma keyboard shortcuts.
Oh man, there's too many. But Figma has a really cool onboarding for keyboard shortcuts. So if you go to the bottom right corner, you go keyboard shortcuts, this thing comes up. See, and it kind of like shows you all the keyboard shortcuts you've used. like I've been using Figma for 3 years and I still haven't used them all. So my favorite ones would probably be just grouping. So Command G. There's also another, depends how much time we have. All the time, hold on for time. Okay, there's another layer that's higher than groups called frames. So what I've got here is a group of 3 dot points, and those 3 dot points are also groups of a circle and a rectangle. But I might not, but for example, I might want to make this a frame instead for whatever reason. So a frame, I feel like it's like a level higher than groups. It's kind of hard to explain until you actually start using it, but frames are a bit more powerful than groups. So groups are quite constrained, whereas with frames, you can do cool things such as you can set rules around constraints. So I can make it so I want this frame to always be, I want all the elements within the frame to always be centered horizontally and centered vertically. And then as I change the size of the frame, the elements within it need to respect these constraints. So if I start resizing this frame right now, oh shit, that didn't work. Sorry, I got it mixed up. I'm going to go to the components inside the frame and then set those constraints. And then as I start kind of resizing this frame, all the items within it kind of respect that. So you can do cool things such as like assigning padding and all that. Figma recently introduced a layer even higher than frames called auto layouts, which gets even more confusing. At work, we're still kind of like trying to educate people on how auto layouts work. I might run through it real quickly, just as an example here right now. If you do like, let's say I have a circle here and then I have a piece of text here. What you can do with auto layouts is it's kind of like code in a way where if I select these two, rather than going Command G to make a group, I can go Shift A, and that's turn it into an auto layout. So auto layout, you can tell it's an auto layout by the icon on the left hand here, on the left hand side here. But then what an auto layout does is you can set the rules of like, I want an auto layout to always be centered vertically and left aligned as well. So like that. But then what you can do is you can set, I want the padding between all the items in this auto layout to be 8 pixels. So that's just reduced it now. But then you can start doing cool things such as, okay, there's a circle here and there's a text here. Let's say I want to add a square into this auto layout. So I can draw a square here and I can drag it in. And then it's just kind of auto layouted the whole thing. And it's also given it the 8 pixels gap that I defined for the whole entire component. And then you can start moving things around as well. And it just works, which is really awesome. You can get really, really deep with auto layouts, but I think that's a whole another workshop. Like that thing takes like an hour to kind of explain to people how to use. So don't worry about that for the hackathon. Just stick to groups, in my opinion. Cool. Any other questions so far? Or that was a bit fast, to be honest.
I guess the question I have is, what's the advantage of like Figma over XD?
Oh, I don't use XD, so I don't even know what features they have, to be honest. But because I know you guys, I know the UniMel teaches Adobe XD. Yeah, what are the features of XD that Figma don't have?
They have this thing called like grid or something where you can just like drag and then it'll just drag out the components. So it's sort of like a component, but it just like does it automatically for you. But that's a plugin though. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot, all this auto layout and auto resizing stuff, I think you can do in Figma as well. It just takes a bit of time to set up. I'm not too sure how easy it is to do in Adobe XD. But yeah. I think one thing I should also cover here is components. So components, like what's an example of a component we could make? Like for example, a primary button. So I've made a button right now like this. purple. And let's give it some text. Cool. So I've now made this button and I've made it a frame and everything. And I've set the constraints for how it should work. Now let's say I want to start using this button throughout my entire design. Rather than just copying and pasting, because I know I'll keep using it quite often, I might create a component. So how you do that is you click on it, then right click, create component. Now you'll notice that the kind of frame or the item has kind of changed to purple, and it's got this kind of icon next to it. So that now signals to me that this is now a master component. And then every time I then make a copy of this, you'll notice that it doesn't have the name above it because it's an instance of this button up here. So if I now go and I'll create like heaps of these, right? And then I go back to the master component. Let's say purple doesn't work for me anymore, and I want to now change it to this turquoise color. All those individual instances also get updated as well. And then I start changing the border radius, like all those get changed as well. So you can imagine if you have like 100 screens in your product, and your product's really complicated, rather than having to go through each one and make sure have I updated the button, you can just do it with one master component here. Yeah, like that thing saved me so much time during work. So would highly recommend kind of identifying what are reusable components and kind of making them into components ahead of time. You can also make components out of other components. So this kind of like touches on a bit of like atomic design and how that kind of all works. So at a low level, you have like the button itself or the button shape itself, then text, and those two combined equal a button. But then you might have, okay, if I have like a sticky footer, for example, and a sticky footer in my design consists of 2 buttons. I can then make this a component. And now this has like so. So I have 2 instances of this component up here, which is a collection of other components. And then I go and change this color again. These all get changed as well. So yeah, the sky's the limit with components, and it's just kind of up to your imagination of what you want to do with it. My advice is, if it's overwhelming and you don't know what should be component and what shouldn't be component, just don't make it a component. Or kind of just confuse you, to be honest. I only do it if you know for sure it's something you're going to keep reusing. All right, cool. Let me just look ahead at my notes to see if I've covered everything. Yeah, I think I have. Okay, cool. We might jump on next to actual prototyping. Cool. So now that, let's say we've fast forwarded a bit in time and we've actually got all of our screens laid out for us. The next thing to do is now actually to start wiring them up into a prototype, which you then can go use and user test with real users. So the basics of Figma prototyping, again, I'll show this around later, but there's a really cool like 5-minute video of how to prototype in Figma. It's super easy. But Figma also has a really cool app called Figma Mirror. I think it's on iOS and Android as well. But what it essentially does is if you're prototyping a mobile application, you just sign in on the app on your phone, and you can kind of like have a look and feel and play around with the prototype in real time on the Figma Mirror app itself, which is really cool. So why I kind of touched on user flows at the beginning was I find user flows super helpful for when trying to lay out a Figma prototype. Because if a user flow is one distinct action that the user should do, you should kind of lay out your Figma files like that as well. So you should just have these specific screens to do this flow. And then when you're actually wiring your prototype up, you have to make sure that, okay, does this user flow do this? So then you're kind of having a series of all these user flows in your file, rather than one kind of big jumbled mess and you're trying to figure out which arrow goes where and stuff. Like that gets super confusing. Like I've seen designs where it's kind of like a web or a maze of arrows, and it gets super confusing for especially if you're not the owner of the file to figure out what's going on. All right, I'm going to jump back to Figma and we'll start prototyping as well. So another cool thing about Figma is they have like a Figma community. So if you go to the Figma community, you can kind of just search for all these design systems. I think like, yeah, you've got material design here, which you can pull into Figma. You've got like illustrations, user flow kits, plugins, like icons and everything as well. So we would highly recommend just reusing a lot of stuff that the community has put together. So right here, I've pulled together a design someone's made. It seems like it's a food delivery app or something. But I'll use this as an example to kind of walk you guys through how to actually start wiring some of these screens up. So let's say I've now finished the look and feel of what my product should look like. Now it's time to actually wire the whole thing up. So here, like the user has kind of just put screens all over the place, and I don't really know what's what. So what I would do here now is I'll start making copies of all of these, and I'll start kind of splitting them out into user flows. So an example user flow that we could do with is this seems like it's like a loading splash screen, and then this seems like it's a login screen, and then this is like a home page. So from here, I could start with these three and kind of just make the user flow like a user logging in into the product. So what would be a user flow here? I might put everyone on the spot. Can someone tell me what we would kind of label these different steps?
Is it like login or landing page / onboarding?
Cool. So user login.
Yeah,
it works. Good. Remember, keep it simple. Like it doesn't have to be over the top. And then step. So you have your user login, and what's step one? Like app loads, or like the landing page. And then you have user enters login details. And then, okay, Lawrence just put in the chat, landing page, login, and then homepage. Cool. So then a user lands on the homepage. Right, so this is the start, this is a user action, and then this is the outcome. So the end outcome is we want the user to land in the homepage and actually be successfully logged in. Cool, so how you actually prototype is you'll see in the top right corner, you have these kind of three tabs. So you have a design tab, a prototype tab, and an inspect. So design is kind of where you'll spend most of your time, just kind of like detailing out how the thing looks and everything. And then once that's all done and you're kind of confident, like, okay, cool, it's time to actually bring this thing to life, that's when you switch to prototype. So prototyping is quite simple because Figma's kind of like pre-baked a lot of interactions in, and it kind of gets the job done for a lot of users. So I'll have my first screen here, which is the app load one. And we want the connector here. And then you kind of ask yourself, like, what's the interaction that a user should do on this one to go to this one? They probably don't need to do anything here, right? It's probably just after a delay. So if I do an after delay of like 1,600 milliseconds or 1.6 seconds, and I set the animation, so you can do animations as well. So maybe there's a dissolve animation. So once this page loads, after 1.6 seconds, the user will be taken to here. I don't like what they have here because this is already pre-filled. So this should actually be empty. Right, so now we might have this one that's like, cool. So the next part is, okay, cool. Now the user actually has to go and fill out their like login details. So for those, it's let's do on tap, and let's also just do dissolve or maybe even instant, for example. So the user clicks on either of these, that will be taken to this next screen. And now once this is done, cool, now user clicks the login button, and then they'll land on the home page. Obviously, there'll be other things in here like you need to check if the login details are correct, etc. But for the purpose of just designing the thing out, like this is simple enough. But you might show this to an engineer and they'll be like, how the hell does this actually work? Like there should be checks involved here. And then that's when you and your product team will actually start to figure out, okay, cool, what are these different checks involved? Like what database or what service do we call to do this login? So make sure so with Figma prototype, when you switch to the prototyping tab, you'll have this kind of blue little arrow or play icon. This is like your starting location for your prototype. So just drag it onto here. What you now do is you hit the play button or the present button in the top right corner. And then you kind of have this. So you press R on your keyboard to restart the prototype at any time. So splash screen loads. After 1.6 seconds, I'm now on the login page. I then click on either of these, and then I import my login details. I then click login, and now I'm on the home page. So that was one user flow. So then what's next? Then you start like detailing out all the other user flows. So how long for time? I'm quick on time. So then, okay, what's next after the home page? What do they have? Okay, so let's look at the search thing. So someone searched for spicy chicken. And then add this to their cart. They confirm their delivery and payment details. And then there's a payment confirmation. Cool, so let's grab these. Cool, so then the next user flow that we want is, okay, user makes an order or user actually orders something. So, what things correctly?
How we have a question in the chat. So
Yeah.
Evelyn asks, like, when prototyping, do the instances of the components inherit the properties?
Yes.
So I guess, okay.
It depends. Wait, it depends what you mean, Evelyn. Do you mean like the component properties of like how this button click behaves, or just like just the look and feel of the button itself?
I guess just the button. Yeah, she's left.
Yeah. So so like before when I was I had a purple button, like this could be a component, for example, right? And these two were instances of master component, and I changed the color from orange to something else. These two would update, but then most importantly as well, because Figma is web-based, the prototype will actually update as well. Like let's do a quick example. So this was our master component from before. I'll just delete these and I'll put this in here. Right. So if we go back to our prototype, it should now be a purple button. But now let's say I want to change it to red. And I go back to my prototype, it's updated in real time as well, which is cool. So yeah, you don't need to like remake the prototype or anything like that. Like once you've made it once and you make changes and stuff, yeah, it all happens in real time. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, so this is a user flow that we have now for kind of making an order. But the problem I see with this is it's too long, right? Like you've got homepage, someone does a search, and then someone gets a search result. And then it's like, okay, cool, actual payment. If I was to simplify this further, actually, no, I'll make it a question. How would you guys simplify this one? Yeah, so right now this user flow is user makes a purchase, right? But it's like I in my opinion, there's two things involved in here. So you have this section here, which is actually searching for the item and then actually choosing the item. And then you have this section over here, which is then, okay, actual payment. So I see those as two separate things. So this kind of goes back into like, yes, these kind of can be sequenced together to make this kind of bigger flow. But when you start doing that, like it's very hard to kind of determine when's the endpoint. Like is the endpoint actually when you actually receive your food or yeah. So what I like to do, what I would do here is I would maybe split this up and then I would duplicate this starting point here. Like so. So then I would make this user flow simply just search for food. And then I would make this one order food. So then with this one, again, simple, right? So search bar over here, on tap, let's do instant. Let's say, which one is this? The veggie tomato mix. So that one, user clicks on that one, they'll come here. Cool. So that's one flow. Now the order food flow is again same starting point as this one. This one is now you're on the food page. You go add to cart. You then go, okay, cool. It's in my cart now. Confirm my payment detail. Oh no, my delivery details, and then payment details. I'm probably missing a step in this design, but I hope it gets the gist. But then you might be wondering, okay, cool. If I wanted to actually make a prototype from end to end, but I've had to split it up by these different flows. Like, how does that work? Because you can kind of see like this end state and this starting state and this end state and this starting state are all the same. Once you actually have your user flows laid out like this, what you can actually do is actually have this one like also do this. So you have this kind of starting state with the search bar, tech users here, but you also have this one, which is the same frame from before, also got tech users here. Same with this one as well. So if I wasn't in prototyping mode, like, and I just kind of gave my developers these user flows, they'd still understand what to build. But when I'm talking to other designers or I'm needing to, create this prototype to do user testing, I can go from end to end. So I could go, okay, user starts at the login step, they get to here, then we ask them, okay, cool, now you're on the homepage, try and do a search for some food, and they can kind of successfully do that as well, without you having to kind of readjust the starting point of where the prototype starts every time. Cool. So let's do a quick run through of that now. So on the homepage now I'm searching for food. Okay, I've got spicy chicken, veggie tomato mix. Cool, I got my food. Now I add to cart, delivery details, payment. and then we're done. So that was kind of like a really quick way of like, it was pretty simple, right? But what we've done is we've kind of split it up into 3 different unique flows, but they're all kind of join up at the end of the day. But when you're kind of building these things out, it's always good to kind of split them up. That way you can also just work it out in chunks as well. Cool. That was the basics of prototyping. We can get a lot more complicated if you guys want, but depends what everyone's appetite is for learning how to prototype with Figma.
I think we have some time to go through a bit more.
Okay, cool. All right, I get to show off then. Okay. So like I'm looking at these 2 screens here, and like it seems like this thing is like something that kind of slides up, right? It's like this search result slides up from the bottom as opposed to just appearing on the screen. So what this might do is, like, say, it's got all these components here. I might just group them all into the one thing, and I might just call this white up thing. So then what you can do is, the way that prototypes and different frames work is, so I have like this thing named here, and I copy it, and I move it over here, and I leave it here as well. Make sure that these 2 are the same names, because what you can do is, Figma will, in the prototype, it will always check like between the 2 screens that you're navigating between, the thing that's different, like are there similar named components, and if so, what's the difference between A and B? So if B is the end result for we want this frame to look like this here, you can make this one start all the way down here, for example, and then I can set its opacity to 0%. So to the naked eye, it doesn't seem like anything's out of the ordinary, but we've got these things kind of like in the background, ready for the prototype. So now if I do this here, and then I go, okay, so on click of this, I want the thing to animate up. So Smart Animate is a really cool Figma feature that they've introduced recently. It takes some getting used to, but let's kind of just give it a shot and see how this works out. Yeah, cool. So what's happened here now is, rather than just going from like a very static like transition, you can kind of see that this thing is sliding up now. Maybe that's too fast. So what we might do is we might go back to this animation thing and maybe slow it down a bit to 600 milliseconds. So then when I click on this again, see, now you've got this slide up animation. You can do other cool things such as, you know, this is just an example, but if you wanted, rather than doing like on tap, if you wanted to do like on drag, for example, so that's another thing. So if I drag, for example, in any direction, it will come up. So that's really cool for like doing interactions with like notification tabs and maybe even menu bars and stuff. So like dragging from this side, from left to right, to open up the menu bar, for example. So yeah, like my tip for that is always have your end state in mind. So our end state was we wanted this, and then make sure, okay, cool, in my end state, what's the difference between my end state and the state before that, and make sure that these components exist in both and they're named the same, and then make sure that, okay, cool, I want this end state to look like this. What's the starting state for that same component? So for us, it was down at the very bottom, and it was hidden by dropping the opacity to 0. So then that way, when you click on this thing, over 600 milliseconds, this thing goes from 0% opacity to 100% opacity, and its Y position comes up to here. Cool. Hopefully that kind of enables you guys to do a lot with all these Figma prototypes. You can get really, really detailed and in-depth with a lot of these things. Like, and it can get quite time-consuming. So for the purpose of a hackathon, yeah, just keep it simple. Cool. We're almost out of time, so I might just blitz through the very end here. So fast forward a few hours, you've now got a working prototype. What's next? If you're running out of time, just start building the thing, to be honest. Don't bother about testing and research. But if you've got time, it's always good to, take your prototype and do a bit of light research on it and some light testing on it. So some very quick ways to user test what you've built is just test it within your team. So that's called dog fooding. Just asking like a developer or like the product manager or something like, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or you show them a few screens, don't tell them what to expect, but ask them to like, okay, here's an app. I want you to try log in and order some food and see if they can successfully do that. Maybe even ask someone else, like a housemate, for example, to do it. And then give them clear tasks and then ask for feedback. And bonus points, you can actually talk to real potential users as well. Always going to user testing with an objective in mind of what you're actually trying to learn. If you're simply just going to user testing, you kind of you don't really know what you actually want to get tested. You're just going to waste everyone's time. So always kind of have even a rough research plan ahead of time. So for example, in that food app, let's say I wasn't too confident with this search functionality, or if users would understand how search would work, that would be my main objective. So my main objective would be seeing if users understand how search works. So user tests can also be done, and research can be done qualitatively and quantitatively. So the things that I've kind of talked through with like, user testing, surveys and all that, that's all qualitative. And talking to users, it's all qualitative. But also in the industry, we also do a lot of things quantitatively. So at times, it's impossible to gauge certain things qualitatively. So in the food app, the food ordering app is an example. Like, yes, I can ask 100 users, like, would you have made this purchase or something, or would you have successfully made a purchase? Like 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes, because it's like right in front of them. But until a real user is actually hungry or actually has the need to order the food, you actually never truly know. So then that's where quantitative research comes into play. So that means we'll actually launch the product, and then we'll actually see how real users behave with this thing. So then we'll run A/B experiments where we'll change certain things and kind of validate our hypothesis. So maybe for our hypothesis, we'll be like, okay, the orange color on the buttons makes people less hungry, and it will turn them off from ordering food. What if we changed it to purple, for example? So you'll run those two tests in parallel, and you'll just see which one leads to more food orders being made. Cool. Let's say, assuming you've done all your user testing, design's all polished, now it's time to get it off to the engineers. So Figma also has a really, really simple way to do developer handles. Again, there's going to be a guide in here, which goes into it in a bit more detail, but I'll quickly just share how to do all of that as well. So that was the last tab in the top right corner. So we had design, prototype, and inspect. So if you jump to the inspect tab, and I then click on any of these. So if I click on this title, for example, so the found 6 results one, it tells me what the font is, what the weight is, how big it is, what the size is, and the alignment. Also tells me the color, but then most importantly as well, it's got the CSS here as well. So yeah, an engineer can just come in and just copy this and just drop it in. Importantly as well, it tells me like what's the spacing between all of these, and just generally how does this thing work. Fast forward a few hours from now, maybe in a day or so, you've finished CodeBrew and you've launched your product. Now what do you do? Like if you're actually going to launch the product for real to users, here's what I would do. I'd catch up on Slate first and celebrate with your team on the massive accomplishment. But then I would also start considering, tracking metrics usage and actually continue to gather feedback from real users. This is a big centerpiece of any product nowadays. Like everyone's just tracking usage of what all users do. Some use it to sell ads to you. Others use it to personalize music recommendations. So yeah, would highly recommend doing that. And always just continuously iterate and improve the product. There's never really a time where you will run out of things to iterate and improve on. Like there'll always be a new feature launching, or there'll always be an existing feature that could be better. So it's kind of up to you guys to kind of pinpoint what those are, and you can kind of pinpoint what those are through user feedback or metrics and usage patterns. So some Figma plugins I would highly recommend trying out is Autoflow, Mockup, and Unsplash. Yeah, just give those a search in the community section. I use these on a day-to-day basis, and they save me a lot of time. Cool. We're nearing the end, so best way to reach out to me, like I'll be checking my emails throughout the weekend. But if you have any more questions, just shoot me an email or find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message, and I'll try to help out any way I can. Canva's hiring. We're hiring a lot. I think we want to double our engineering capacity by the end of the year, which is mental. And so we're hiring engineers, data scientists, data engineers, like machine learning people, product designers especially as well, product managers as well, and from all levels. Like there'll be a grad role for pretty much anything. So yeah, definitely keep us in mind. Cool. That wraps up the presentation and the workshop. Any questions?